Hey folks, welcome to week 2, AP Lit Vocab. Yay! We made it through week 1. Hopefully this little process is working out. Let me know if there's any snafus. Week 2, our theme is character. So we're going to be reviewing different types of characters and again, several new terms in relation to character. So let's get going. Let me share my screen with you, sort of like I did last time. And here we go. So just a couple things. Remember that when we talk about character, first of all, there we go. We're just talking about the people and animals in the story, right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So we're going to talk a lot this year about this term characterization. How is characterization different from character? Well, characterization is how the author portrays the people in the story. And that can be done through the author telling us directly or through indirect clues that we have. For instance, an example of direct characterization might be the author saying, Johnny is mean. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty basic example. However, if that detail is told to us indirectly, we might get the information that Johnny punched his friend in the arm and left a bruise. Well, we might infer then that Johnny is mean, but it doesn't tell us directly that Johnny is mean. We have to infer that through something the character does or something the character says to someone else, or how the character says some of those things. So we can learn about that character both directly as well as indirectly. Some other different types of characters, and you're going to see the next few slides kind of have verses on them. And this just means that a character is going to be one or the other. Okay, so a character is either going to be major or main, or the character is going to be minor. So your major, your main characters, those are your most important characters. Those are the characters that the conflict is centering around. Those are your protagonists, those are your antagonists. And then a minor character is less important, not very well developed, usually don't know a whole lot about minor characters, or they enter the story briefly, for instance. The next type we have a choice of is round characters or flat characters. This has nothing to do with body type or any sort of physical characteristics. A round character is simply a character that's very well developed. We know many traits about him or her, so much that if we could take the story off the page and make it come to life, they would seem like a real person. Okay, we feel like we know some things about him or her. Versus a flat character, has very few traits that are revealed, not very well developed. And really, a flat character's purpose in a story is to show something about another more important character. They're really not in the story for themselves, but they're meant to sort of reveal something about another more important character. Another choice we have to make when we're thinking about characters is the character static or is it dynamic? Static characters do not change throughout a story. They basically stay the same. Static characters, S-T-A, stay the same. That's how I always kind of keep these two straight. It doesn't mean that nothing happens to that character. It doesn't mean they don't age. They're just not that well-developed character that's going to really go through changes in the course of the story. They're pretty much the same in the beginning of the story as they are in the end. A dynamic character, however, is a character that changes and develops throughout the course of the story. Often these characters grow in some way or they learn something. And when we're talking changes, we're talking typically a permanent change. And so the change that this character goes through is something that, alters their mindset, or, now they're different because of that. That change sometimes could be death, because that's what it takes in order for that character to be different. But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times that's sort of a mental or emotional change. The next term might be new for you, and these are called stock characters. And stock characters are used a lot in literature and in movies as well. And stock characters are based on stereotypes. They're characters you see in a lot of different kinds of stories or a lot of different kinds of movies. They often rely on either cultural types or certain characteristics or stereotypes, and they're familiar to us because we've seen them before. So several examples include sort of the wise old man. You have the damsel in distress, right? She needs somebody to save her, somebody to help her. Often there's a clever or cunning person. And we also, another really common one is a young man, typically, who is a rebel against authority. Kind of that young rebel. And those are stock characters because we recognize them. We've seen them before in literature or in other movies. And so we can recognize them pretty easily. This term is a term we're going to talk about a lot this year. You may be familiar with it or have heard of it before, but foil characters are actually pretty common in classic literature and the kinds of literature we're going to look at this year. And basically, foil characters are when you have two characters who are in contrast to one another. And the purpose of foil characters is that they're meant to highlight those particular traits of the other character that are in contrast. So a couple of, you see movie examples are on your screen, like The Lion King with Mufasa and Scar. We have a sort of a noble lion, and we have a deceitful and mischievous lion. And by noting that they're so different in personality, it makes Scar, sorry, I forgot his name for a minute, makes Scar seem more deceitful, and Mufasa seem more, I guess, noble or more the good guy. Wait a minute, did I mix those up? Mufasa and Scar? Anyways, one's good, one's bad, and by putting them next to each other and having them interact, it makes one seem more good and one seem more evil, for instance. If you've ever seen The Simpsons, I think Lisa and Bart are a really good example of foil characters as well. Lisa, she's very practical, she's very logical, she, you know, in contrast to Bart, right? The jokester, he's always getting in trouble. And Lisa's sort of that good girl, and he's that kind of a rebel character. And so when you put these two in contrast to each other, it makes Lisa seem even more like a goody two-shoes and Bart seem even more rebellious and naughty in that regard. We'll talk about later in this year, Hamlet has several sets of foil characters when we get to that text, and as well as a number of other texts that we'll look at this year. So ancillary characters. Ancillary characters are what I call an umbrella term, and you're going to hear me say the words umbrella term several times this year. And what I mean by that is, you know, you think of an umbrella, right? And it's this covering that, and there's usually something that is underneath the umbrella. And so what it means is that it's more of a general term, and then there's several things that are sort of underneath this general term. So ancillary characters are what we call helper characters. And foil characters and stock characters are what are examples of ancillary characters, because they are often less important characters. There's not always the protagonist or antagonist, but they can highlight the protagonist and antagonist. Now, not all foil characters, not all stock characters are ancillary characters, but think about which characters in a text or in a movie are helper characters, and they're somehow helping the main character. That's what we label as ancillary characters. Comic character, Pretty straightforward. It's not a character who's necessarily funny all the time, but somehow they do add a lightness, a sense of humor, sarcasm to the play itself. Romeo and Juliet has this. Clearly not a funny play. It's a tragedy. But the nurse adds lightness. She jokes with Juliet. She makes jokes about Juliet that are sort of inappropriate or on the raunchy side. And so even though she's not a funny character, so to speak, she adds sort of this lightness and this humor. And so we call her a comic character. I think this term is also one that is new for you, and an anti-hero. These are really common in comic books. That's probably the most common place you see anti-heroes in sort of modern culture. But an anti-hero is a protagonist, and it seems like they are in a lot of ways not a hero. But yet there's sort of these heroic qualities to them that somehow make them admirable, even though they go against a lot of the qualities that a hero might have. Shrek is such a good an example of this. He doesn't look like a typical hero. He doesn't act like a hero. He doesn't want to be a hero in any sort of way. Yet he ends up sort of acting in that role and saving Princess Fiona and falling in love with her, even though that was never really his intention or his purpose. I have Wolverine up there. I am not a comic book person. I don't know a lot about comic books, but again, I know Wolverine. I know that comic books are a really good example of anti-heroes. And Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby is also another really good example. I don't want to tell you too much about this yet because it will kind of spoil some of the things that happen in The Great Gatsby, which is one of my favorite books, by the way. But hang on to it, and we'll come back to that. We can talk about anti-heroes again when we get into Gatsby. So the term doppelganger or alter ego really became popular on Facebook a few years ago because you could sort of take your picture and it would say, oh, which celebrity do you look like? Or find your doppelganger. And doppelganger is actually a German word it translates to double goer. And how we talk about doppelganger or alter ego in literature is that it's sort of a second self. It's taking someone and their alter ego or their doppelganger is the negative or an evil manifestation of what's on the inside. So it's almost like you have this good and evil, as you can kind of see in the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde picture, right? One of them sort of looks good, but then there's this kind of evil side coming out. And Jekyll and Hyde are meant to sort of represent that kind of good and evil side. Also, you see a picture of Frankenstein there, and Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is the doctor. By the way, a lot of people think Frankenstein is the creature, but Victor Frankenstein is the doctor and the creature he creates. And it's sort of believed that this creature is Victor Frankenstein's doppelganger, alter ego, that it's sort of this negative manifestation of what's on the inside of the doctor coming to life. Our last word for this week is caricature, and you're probably most familiar with this word because you might have had your caricature done on the boardwalk or at Valley Fair. And if you think about a typical caricature, the artist takes your features and exaggerates some of those features and then sort of downplays the others. It's the same thing in literature. It's only in the written form where certain characteristics are written and exaggerated and others are sort of downplayed. I'm going to read you a little example and I'm going to kind of explain it as well. So the example is from a Charles Dickens novel, and it says, Mr. Chadband is a large yellow man with a fat smile and a general appearance of having a good deal of train oil in his system. Mrs. Chadband is a stern, severe-looking, silent woman. Mr. Chadband moves softly and cumbrously, not unlike a bear who has been taught to walk upright. He's very much embarrassed about the arms, as if they were inconvenient to him, and he wanted to grovel. So that's the example, and a couple of things kind of stand out to me in there. So they describe Charles Dickens describes Mr. Chadband as oily and fat. And I think that's not only meant to be sort of this literal description of Mr. Chadband, but also a representation of his character, that perhaps he is a bit phony by using the terms oily and fat, like something's bloated or, full of excuses or lies. And so, again, a character kind of exaggerates certain features about a character. So I think that is it for this week. That is going to end our show. Again, make sure you take notes, watch the video more than once if you need to, and bring all of your questions to class. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye.